Have you ever been the one that everyone counts on, but quietly wondered, who's holding me? I have. I'm Dr. Dalesa Rueda, licensed marriage and family therapist, CEO and founder of Inspired and Free, a virtual therapy practice operating in 10 states. Our mission is rooted in helping people reconnect with their worth, break generational patterns, and cultivate healthier, more joyful lives. That mission feels especially close to my heart today as we dive into a conversation that challenges what strength really looks like and who gets to rest. You see, I know what it feels like to be called strong while silently struggling. There was a time when everything on the outside looked perfect. I was earning my doctorate, I was raising 3 daughters and building my career. But inside, I was exhausted. I was ending a marriage and filling every moment with distractions just to avoid falling apart. People saw success, but all I was living was survival. It wasn't until I stopped performing and started choosing myself that I began to heal. That's when I found joy, not in what others expected of me, but in finally embracing who I actually was. That's why this event means so much, because it's not just about managing, it's about reclaiming our stories and learning that those stories are more alike than we realize, but also reclaiming our rest and our right to thrive. We'll hear today from 2 phenomenal women who are helping us do just that. First, Hannah Williams. Hannah is a social activist and former data analysis tackling a major issue, salary transparency. After discovering that she was underpaid, she launched Salary Transparent Street, a viral video series where she interviews strangers about their pay to help others learn and earn more. She's testified in support of pay transparency bills across Virginia, Maryland, and DC. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, Time, and BBC News. In 2023, she was named a Money.com changemaker, and in 2024, she earned a spot in Forbes 30 Under 30. And of course, Dr. Judith Joseph. Dr. Judith is a board-certified psychiatrist, researcher, and award-winning content creator specializing in the science of happiness and mental health. She chairs the Women of Medicine Initiative at Columbia and serves as a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at NYU Grossman. She's received a 2023 Congress Proclamation Award, was named one of the top 6 NAACP mental health champions, and is recognized as a 2024 Very Well Mind Top 25 Thought Leader. Her new book, High Functioning, is based on the world's first peer-reviewed study on high-functioning depression. With over 1 million followers, Dr. Judith is helping redefine what mental wellness looks like and feels like in real life. So, with me, take a deep breath, unclench your jaw, and allow yourself to be here. Let's shed the performance. We're choosing truth tonight, and we're going to reclaim the joy waiting for us underneath all of the doing. And please join me in welcoming Hannah Williams and Dr. Judith Joseph.
Hello, everyone. How are y'all doing? Thank you so much for coming out with us tonight. Thank you so much to Dr. Judith for being here and speaking with us.
Thank you for being here, and it's so great to see everyone.
Awesome. So we are going to have a really nice, intimate conversation. I've got a couple questions for you, Dr. Judith, and then we'll take some questions from the crowd after we do our Happiness Lab walkthrough.
Yes.
So my first question for you, Dr. Judith, you're a scientist and a therapist who studies happiness. Can you tell us the difference between happiness and joy?
Yes, so, everyone here is here because they're curious about the science of their happiness, right? So most people don't know this, but happiness is an idea and joy is an experience. So in my lab, I have a private practice where I see patients for therapy, and then I have a research lab where we measure the science of happiness. So when people come into the private practice, Hannah, they'll say, I just want to be happy. And then I'll say, okay, well, what does happiness mean to you? And they often list a bunch of things like events, like I will be happy when I pay off my debt, or I have a family, or if I have a career that I'm really proud of. But the problem with that mindset is that when those things happen, eventually you still want more. You're still not happy. You're still searching. And the science actually shows us that. However, when we look at happiness in a lab, what we're doing is we're adding up all these points of joy. For example, if you're hungry and you eat and you savor it and it's yummy, that's a point. If you're tired and you take a nap and you wake up feeling refreshed, that's a point. If you're stressed and you're able to self-soothe, that's a point. So we add up all these human pleasures, and that's how we determine whether or not you're actually happier. So it's a real reframe when you show patients and you show people that instead of delaying your happiness for an event, try to get as many points of joy in the day as possible. And it's way more hopeful because if you didn't get a point today, you can get a point tomorrow, or you can get 2 points tomorrow. It's more attainable and achievable versus this idea of being happy when this event happens or doesn't happen is way more elusive.
I love that. I think I got a point from being here, and everybody here got a point for being here. So your lab has a motto, understand the science of your happiness. What does that mean?
Well, I want everyone to hold their hand up. Okay, good. You can put your hand down. We all have our unique science. And in your lab manuals, you'll see, I believe it's the first or second page after the bios, you'll see a Venn diagram. And that Venn diagram is called a biopsychosocial. So you'll see these 3 circles. A biopsychosocial is something that we all have, but no 2 biopsychosocials are the same. Similar to your fingerprint. We all have a fingerprint, but no 2 fingerprints are the same. And so what I found is that a lot of times people come to me and they've tried all these methods, they've read these books, they've done these things that they saw on memes, and they're still not happy. Why? Because they don't understand the science of their own happiness. So there's only going to ever be one Hannah, ever, in the future of the universe and in the history of the universe. Only one Judith. There's only going to be one of you. And the chances of you existing are so small, so you're here for a reason. So try to understand what makes you you. And so that biopsychosocial model, what it does is it breaks down areas of your life in ways that you can understand where you may be losing points of joy. You can't understand the science of your happiness if you don't understand the science of what makes you unhappy. So when you look at that Venn diagram, you'll see biological factors. So some of us have medical issues that take away from our points of joy. Like I have a low thyroid, so if I'm not careful, my thyroid imbalance can actually lead me to feel unhappy. Psychologically, we have our unique traumas. So personally, I have a history of scarcity trauma. I came to this country when I was very little. I had very, very little resources. We talked about that on your podcast.
Yeah, we sure did.
And that plays a role into how I go about life sometimes. Sometimes I get these irrational fears that I'm going to run out of money, and then I overwork, and that plays into my high-functioning depression. But other people here have different past traumas. You may have some personal traumas that are very painful, and we all have different attachment styles. So that goes into that psychological bucket. And then socially, what's happening in our own worlds, our own ecosystems. So what type of jobs do we have? You do a lot of work in salary transparency.
Sure do.
And jobs can be a real stressor, but relationships can be stressors too. And then, certain social habits like excessive drinking and drug use and so forth, that could be a factor. Not getting access to nature, not getting movement, and not eating foods that are healthy. All of those are in the social factors. So when you understand the science of your happiness based on that model, that many of us medical students use, but no one else knows about it. I really wanted to make that available to everyone so they can actually map out, where are they losing these points of joy? And then they know how to add back to those points of joy. And so, and also that is really helpful because you learn where you're losing most of your joy. So for example, if you're partnered with someone who's toxic, you can eat all the kale in the world, but you're still going to be unhappy, right? So you learn about the areas of your life that you really need to put a lot of investments in to reclaim your joy.
Yeah, thank you so much for breaking that down for us, because I don't know if anybody here is a scientist. I'm not. So breaking down the science of happiness for people who don't understand it really means a lot to me, at least. So you've been raising awareness of a term called anhedonia, Anhedonia. Can you explain what that means and how it affects us?
Yeah, so anhedonia sounds like an exotic country, but it's not. It's actually a medical term that's been around for over 100 years, and it means a lack of joy and interest in things that used to actually make us happier, right? Make us feel joyful. But many people walk around feeling blah, meh, really not feeling excited about anything, and they don't even realize that that is an actual scientific term. And in 2020, when I was sitting at my desk and I was giving a talk to a major hospital system in April of 2020, I was supposed to be the voice of support and reassurance for all of these doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals who they were really very overwhelmed because of what was happening in the world. And then halfway through the talk, I realized, wait a second, I think I have anhedonia. And for someone who studies it and researches it and treats this and diagnoses it, it snuck up on me. From the outside, I looked so put together, had the family, had the businesses, was always on TV and getting all these prestigious awards, but I was feeling really empty and numb. And I thought, well, if this could happen to me, how many other people does this happen to? And so I wanted to make a lot of material about anhedonia because I think it's a common human experience that people just don't even know what it is. They experience it, but they just don't understand it. And it's really important to have a term for these experiences, because I liken it to, if you don't know how you're feeling, if you can't name it, it's almost as if you're in a dark room and you can't see what's going on and you hear a loud crash and you really can't see, so you start to panic. Some of us would start swinging, some of us would start screaming, some would start running. But if you turn that light on and you saw that it was just a vase that broke or some inanimate object, you're like, ooh, I'm safe, right? This is what happens to our brains when we don't know how we feel. So if people feel empty, meh, blah, and they don't know what it is, it creates a lot of uncertainty for them because the human brain wants to know what's happening. And so having a term for what you're experiencing is so empowering. And when I started making content around anhedonia, I was just really surprised because in our science world, it's such a boring term.
Really?
But when I was creating content, I just got tens of millions of people being like, that's what I'm experiencing. They just didn't know what it was. They were like, well, I thought that was just life. No. We were built with the DNA for joy. We all have dopamine in our brains. And I've traveled the world to over 30 countries, and even in places where people have no running water, you can still see joy and laughter. So, joy is a survival tool. It really allows us to overcome things that are extremely challenging and unpleasant.
Yeah. How do we see anhedonia affect us in our careers and our finances? I'm definitely interested in this because I ask people what they do and how much they make for a living. So I need to know so I can share this on the street with the people. What can you share?
It's a great question. And where I practice in Midtown Manhattan, sometimes I'm sitting across from the most wealthiest people. And at other times, because I do research, people who enroll in studies can be very, very wealthy and also have very little. So we see a wide range because they're usually coming into the research studies because other things haven't worked for them. And so it's interesting because people who have it all, who are chasing more, it doesn't even make them happy anymore. It doesn't even give them joy. But it's just so unpleasant for them to sit still. They just don't even know what it's like to just relax. And what I found is that a lot of people, they think they're chasing these goals, but what they're really doing is they're trying to outrun their past. So many people have unresolved trauma, and rather than processing that trauma, they have this inner restlessness, this fight or flight. And it looks very different than the fight or flight you'll see, let's say, in a combat veteran, right? It's a very different type of avoidance. When you think of classic trauma, you think of people who don't want to be triggered by a person, a situation, a place. But those of us who can't sit still because we're pathologically productive, we outrun our past by being busy and distracting. So it's a bit different than burnout, because burnout is a workplace phenomenon. So burnout is when the workplace is causing these symptoms of exhaustion, lack of motivation, irritability. But technically, if you take that person out of the workplace, they should get better, because it's the workplace causing the problem. Folks with high functioning depression, you take them out of the workplace and they still can't relax. They're busy cleaning out their garage or taking on some side hustle or two or three, or taking on people's problems and overworking, because burnout is the environment causing the problem. High functioning depression is there's something inside that's unresolved that they are trying to outrun by being busy. So when they're sitting still, they feel empty. When they're not working, they feel restless. And so, what a lot of my work with these patients has to do with allowing them to be able to feel okay resting and sitting still, because they feel very guilty when they aren't busy. They feel lazy, And so I explained to them, that one of the trauma responses is guilt and shame and blame. So even when you rest and you've done nothing wrong, you don't feel worthy of that rest. So it's a lot of psychoeducation. It's a lot of what you see in your hands, explaining the biopsychosocial and explaining why these symptoms manifest, so that they don't feel as if it's their fault. They're not feeling blamed, because it's really difficult for human beings to be kind to themselves when they are taking on this shame and blame.
That is so relatable. My husband's like nodding at me. Can you break down for us the reason why high functioning workers and people have a hard time slowing down?
I think a lot of people forget who they are. Over time, life happens, things happen. And one of my earlier studies as a principal investigator in my lab, it was actually one of my favorite studies, but at the time I was like, oh my gosh, this study is so hard. But it was with postpartum mothers.
Oh.
And the challenging part of that study was bringing in the moms, and we had to collect the breast milk and so forth. But one of the things that I noticed is that because they brought the babies in, so that was fun.
The best part.
The babies were so cute. The babies, when they were drinking their bottles, if you ever watch a baby drinking a bottle, they're just like,
The best. Having the time of their life.
It's like really fun, because they just are built with that DNA for joy. Joy is a survival for them. If the milk didn't taste that good, they wouldn't drink it and they would not thrive, right? So I think that somewhere along the way in life, things happen to us, and many of us, either we don't have the support or the tools to process it and to get through it, and be resilient. So instead of doing that, we push it down. We just don't deal with it. Maybe we're taught to deal with problems that way from our attachment figures, our families, maybe culturally, or maybe there was just no space for us to do that. So we just push things down. And the problem with pushing down these negative emotions is that if that is your coping mechanism for all your life, then eventually you start to push down, for many people, the ability to feel joy. So you just get into this mindset of not feeling and being numb and just doing. And I say to a lot of the people in my practice, I ask them, are you a human doing or a human being? And they'll be like, oh, I'm doing that thing again, And it's not to say that, when you work on yourself, you get automatically better. It's a constant work in progress. But really understanding how these behaviors developed in the first place allows many of them to be able to check themselves and be like, okay, this is why I'm doing this. I need to practice some of my skills so that I can change my behaviors.
I love that. If anyone in the audience here has someone in their life who has high functioning, depression, they just are not able to slow down, how can we better support them?
Yes, I get this question all the time. And what I notice in families, because I treat children, adolescents, adults, and elders in my practice, I often see a lot of the behaviors being passed down. So you see this high-functioning mom, and then the kid is overcommitted, overwhelmed, busy, And I once had a therapist, and I talk about this in my book, who told me that, what you have is contagious. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, that lack of joy, it spreads.
Oof.
Just like how joy spreads, the lack of joy spreads. If you've ever had the unfortunate pleasure or the unfortunate circumstance actually of working for a boss that was really unhappy, you see what the workers are like.
Yeah, misery loves company.
Yes, they're grumpy. People are like, But if you ever had the pleasure of working for someone joyful, it's the opposite. You see people who are like, hey, how's it going? They're holding the door for you. They're smiling, making eye contact. So joy is contagious in the way that a lack of joy also spreads. So it's really important to first take care of yourself. And when you're living with someone, or if you have someone in your life who is very busy and doesn't prioritize joy, chances are they're not meeting their basic needs. And usually I pull out this biopsychosocial and I'll ask my clients, like, so what are you eating in a day? Many times these people are really stressed. And, they're always like, well, Dr. Joseph, isn't stress anxiety and it's not depression? And I say, actually, we're learning that this old model that we had where we separated everything in the brain, we're like, this is anxiety, this is depression, this is that. We're learning that a lot of it is connected. So think about it. If you've ever been stressed out, think about anyone who you know who's really stressed. Were they joyful? No. It's really hard to be joyful when you're stressed. That's why when I've traveled to these countries and there are these monks and they're so peaceful, they also look really joyful. Yeah. Like they have nothing. You'll go into their rooms, they have like literally a mat.
And they are so happy.
So happy. And they're also so peaceful.
Yeah.
So that lack of being able to relax, and what happens is that if you're so tense and stressed, it's really hard to make good decisions. And so many times, a lot of my clients aren't meeting their basic needs. And there are all these studies that show when you're stressed, you reach for the greasy processed foods, right? You don't make the best decisions. So many of them don't even have basic nutrition. So what I say to the loved ones is, they're not going to change based on what you say to them, because know that they probably feel their whole identity is wrapped in their role. So try to meet them at their basic needs. If you see they're eating poorly, make a home-cooked meal for them or bring something for them. Or, if they're used to showing up for others because they've decided that that's how they're going to earn their love and self-worth, then turn them down. If they're going to do for you, say, actually, I'm good. What can I do for you? And also mirror the change that you want to see. So they may have a hard time being vulnerable and sharing their feelings, so you may have to mirror for them and share with them to show them that nothing bad happens if you let your guard down and you share these negative emotions.
Yeah, I love how loved ones in our lives can help us battle the biggest things that we're going through, like high-functioning depression. So when I got your book, there was a bookmark in it, and there was a saying on it that said, pathologically productive. What does that term mean?
Well, that very inner restlessness, people used to think that the fight or flight was only seen in like severe combat, but a lot of people who are trying to outrun pain, they just can't sit still. We all know someone like that who just cannot relax. And I think that we do get rewarded in today's world because of capitalism. And I think it's actually on the Venn diagram you have in the social part. Your bosses will reward you for being pathologically productive, for overworking. So you're getting these mixed messages because inside you don't feel good about how busy you are, but you're getting all this external validation on the outside. And I think many of us need reminders that, the world that we live in today is so different than the world 40, 50 years ago. I always say that the depression today is very different than depression years ago. 50 years ago, we didn't have access to emails at all time. We couldn't log on to work at all time. Now we do. 50 years ago, when we talked to people on the phone, we didn't see our faces. Now we can't escape our face. We're constantly bombarded with the image of ourselves, and we're constantly self-scrutinizing. We're constantly comparing. 50 years ago, we didn't have all these processed foods. I mean, we just had less toxins. So think about all the things that have happened in our modern world. So we really have to think about all these different ways that we're losing points of joy and be really intentional about protecting our joy based on what we know about the modern world.
Yeah. How is high-functioning depression also, how does it impact financial stress and, our money?
Yes, well, one of the things that I talk about a lot is scarcity trauma because, personally, I mean, I'm a board-certified psychiatrist and researcher, and I had no idea how my past unresolved scarcity trauma led to my overworking, my own high-functioning depression. And so I think that for many of us who have come from limited resources, it's hard for us to slow down and relax because there's this fear of running out. But for others, we have the opposite reaction. Some of us hoard and pinch pennies. Others of us, we're unfamiliar with abundance, so we just spend until we get back to a baseline so that we're like living on the edge again because that feels more familiar. And I think that it doesn't even have to be a personal scarcity. It could be scarcity passed down from earlier generations. Many of my clients in New York who've never experienced personal scarcity, when we talk about their past and their families, and some of their families fled terrible situations, their grandparents survived terrible wars, and they're like, well, this is just how our family has this relationship with money because of my great-grandma, who went through this terrible thing. We're always afraid of running out. So this is our philosophy and our culture with regards to money. So sometimes that generational trauma gets passed down.
Definitely, and it's so important to be aware of how our family and the generational impacts impact us today. I'm sure there's people who can relate to that in the audience right now. So you talk about scarcity trauma. One more question about it. What is its role in high-functioning depression, and how can people combat it?
I think the first step is recognizing it, that what I talk about in my book, the methodology, the 5 V's. I use 5 because in many countries, 5 is a very relatable number. Why? Because most people have 5 fingers. So the first step is really validating. So acknowledging and accepting that this happened. Because if you don't know that this is what's happening, then you just don't even know why you're this way. And the second V is venting and expressing how you feel. So that could be in the form of verbal venting with a therapist. But if it's someone who's not paid to listen to your problems, you can vent to someone, 1 or 2 people that you trust. And there's a difference between venting in a healthy way versus trauma dumping, right? You want to ask for emotional consent, like, hey, is this a good time to talk to you? Are you ready to hear what I have to say? And you want to vent with intention. Because when you vent without, an intention to resolve an issue and you're just trauma dumping, you actually feel worse. The data shows us that you feel worse. And so sometimes I practice with my patients. I'll just say, let's practice venting. So I'm going to ask you all to vent with me on a count of 3. Any feeling, good or bad, doesn't matter, that you've had, any emotion you had today, on a count of 3, I want you to yell it out. Okay?
All right.
Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Irritated.
Oh, I heard a lot of good ones. Irritated, worked, overworked, exhausted. So yeah, it's really helpful to get it out. In my lab, when people come in, we'll do a demonstration with a red balloon, and I'll ask every participant to try and push that balloon underwater. And we've had 100% failure rate. No one can get that balloon to stay underwater, right? You cannot out-science physics. But what we do then is that we pass that same balloon around, and we ask each person to let some air out, and eventually that balloon starts gliding on the water, and you can push it down. So venting, in the terms of physics, is letting out that pressure. When we let out how we feel, we actually feel better when we're doing it with an intention. But you don't have to verbally vent. Some of my neurodivergent clients like to write instead. Others like to sing, dance, pray. You can express your feelings however you feel that is authentic to you. And then the third thing I ask my clients to do is practice values. So on your handout in your lab manual, you'll see a list of values at the very end. It's a long list of values. And then you'll also see like a diamond diagram that shows you kind of like a reflection. And this is all in my book as well, where you have like the higher level values and then the lower level values. So if you notice the very bottom of the diamond, there's superiority. So how many people on their deathbed will say, I just wish I had 5 more minutes to boss someone around? Like, no one would say that, right? So when you think of values, think priceless, not price tags. we often chase the things that have the price tags. But at the end of the day, when we only have a few minutes on this earth, we're not going to want those things. I'm not going to be like, I wish I had a Birkin. I'm going to say, I wish I had 5 minutes with my daughter, you know?
Yeah.
So if you tap into these things that give you meaning and purpose, those are the things that actually give you those points of joy. And I have a demonstration for values that I'd like for you to help me with.
Yep, I think that's my next question. How can we practice these 5 V's? Let's do it.
Well, we'll do that demonstration after I go through the other 2 V's.
Okay.
But because I really want to, I think it's a powerful imagery. But the next V is vital. It's like taking care of your body and your brain, because you only get one. Since my daughter is 2, I told her every day, like, how many bodies do you have? And she's like, 1. And I'm like, well, what do you have to do with it? I have to take care of it. You know, like, we only get one body and brain, but sometimes we're just so mean to ourselves. We're like, oh, I don't like the way I look and I don't like this. Rather than saying, I can walk, like, I can get up, you know, I can, like, actually go out into the world and do things, you know. So taking care of your body and brain are some of the traditional vitals, like eating well, sleeping well, movement. But other things like protecting your brain from too much tech exposure. Right?
I need that one.
Yes, we all do, because it really does impact us. And there was a recent study out of one of the University of Texas schools where they took the smartphone feature out of the phone for 2 weeks for people, so they could still, like, text and communicate with others, but not having access to that smartphone capacity to be online and on socials. Actually, the way that the data looked, it looked like as if they were being treated with an antidepressant.
Wow.
And what they found was that it was because people were actually spending more time talking to each other, sleeping, right? Remember those points of joy, getting rest, connection.
Yeah.
They spent time in nature, getting movement. So we leave so many points of joy on the table because we're glued to that phone. And the other non-traditional vitals are things like the relationships that we're in. You know, a lot of the literature is showing that the quality of our relationships is really ending up being super powerful in terms of our actual physical health and our longevity. So, you know, you may say, like, oh, I'm going to, like, stay with this toxic person forever, but it's literally draining your life force. So you have to figure that one out, right? And then the other vitals that are important for us with high functioning is the work life. We have a hard time with that. And then the last V is vision. How do you plan joy in the future so that you keep on moving forward instead of getting stuck? And planning joy does not have to be like a spa day. It could be celebrating a small win. Like when you get to work on time, saying, I got to work on time in spite of this terrible traffic.
Right.
Let me treat myself to, like, 5 minutes at my desk just to, like, ground myself, you know? Or, you know, I've worked on a project and I finished it rather than jumping into the next project, like many of us do, saying, that was a big deal. I finished it and it was on time. You know, let me acknowledge that and celebrate this small win. So those are the 5 V's.
Wow.
And I can show you the demonstration now.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. Show me how to put that into practice.
Well, before I do that, I have to make you an honorary professor of the Happiness Lab.
Yes.
So you'll have your white coat ceremony.
All right. Ooh, it's official.
Get that tag off.
You didn't see that part.
Yes. So we've traveled across the country doing these demonstrations, and at every stop we have a different happiness professor, and we do these lab demonstrations because I find it really powerful to teach people using imagery.
Definitely.
And I teach at NYU, so a lot of my students love having things to do rather than sitting down.
Thank you so much.
I'm a doctor
picture?
now. I love it. I feel so official now.
So let's go over here.
Okay.
So you know how I said that the brain in a workplace setting has a lot of stress, and that's, oh, sorry, I should use this. This is better, right? Okay, sorry about that. So the brain in the workplace setting has a lot of stress, and when you move the brain out of the workplace, it should be better. Well, that's burnout. Most of us, when we have these unresolved issues, you know, even though if we're out of the workplace, we still can't sit still. So with my clients, can you please help me?
Yes.
Thank you, Professor. With my clients, because they're so busy, sometimes I just bring it back to the basics. And because I work with really children, and I often use a lot of the tools in children with the adults. And because sometimes we play with slime, and I'll give the slime to the adults, and they're like, "What is this?" And then they're like, "Oh, can I have it?" The other thing that we do with adults is that we do laugh therapy, and I do this with the kids, but I do it with the adults too. So I'll demonstrate that for you. Who in here saw Wicked?
Oh.
Okay, good. So Cynthia Erivo's character, she has a really good cackle. So on the count of 3, I want you to give me your best witch cackle. 1, 2, 3. Oh, that wasn't that evil. Come on, you can do better than that. And let's do like a Santa Claus one. So put your hand on your belly and give me on a count of 3, a ho, ho, ho. 1, 2, 3.
Ho, 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 ho.
Very good. And now let's do a sneaky one. So I want you to look to your side and do like a little giggle, like a snicker. 1, 2, 3. So how did that make you feel? Let's hear some venting. How did it make you feel?
Alive.
Yeah, right? Playful. We lose out on these points of joy because we're so serious, right? So that's just a demonstration of the mind-body connection, because when you actually smile more, not to say to be, toxic positivity, but when you smile more, you'll see other people smile back. Test it out when you leave here. Smile at someone. They'll be like, "Why is she smiling at me?" But they'll smile back. And I often say that smiling is like the universal language. You go to any country and you smile, people smile at you. It's just how we're built, right? We're built with the DNA for joy. But with my busy clients, I'll ask them to keep these rocks with them, because with children, when they're babies and you put your finger in their hand, they'll automatically grasp, right? They're made to connect, because connection means survival and thriving. And having something to hold on to is sometimes so rudimentary, but it just makes us feel grounded. And read what this says, Professor Hannah.
It says knowledge.
So knowledge is a value that I often, throughout my life, lost sight of. I used to really love to learn just for the learning aspect. And then as I became more accomplished in my education, it was all about not failing.
Yeah.
So I lost sight of why I really enjoyed knowledge. So I have to ground myself in that. So I'm going to put that here. I'm going to ask you to hold that up.
Okay.
And Professor Hannah, what does that say?
Family.
Yes. So family is really important. And what does that say?
We've got community.
Community.
And then faith.
So what happens is that over time, if we get distracted with the superficial things, with the price tags. Oh, is it not? Sorry about that.
Oh no, is it?
This is a new one.
It's brand new. It's got one of those
Yeah.
safety seals.
Talk amongst yourselves. Just kidding. It's the old SNL one. Over time, what happens is that when we let things that don't matter distract us from what really matters, it becomes really difficult to focus on the things that keep us rooted and grounded in purpose.
My fingers aren't covering up too much.
So it's harder to see what those words say, right? Can't see them.
Nope.
But then when you practice and you're intentional about tapping into the 5 V's and really giving more weight to things that are purposeful, that starts to clear up. So we're going to let that simmer. And I want you to take a look at that page in front of you with the high-level values. And I just want you to take some time to point out ones, and we can put it there, it'll clear up.
Put it back.
Mhm.
There we go.
And if anyone feels inclined to do so, just go through that list and tell me about ones that really resonate with you. Just raise your hand if you want to. Growth. Anyone else?
Nature.
That's a good one. Nature. You said affection. Mm-hmm. Any other values that resonate? Understanding. What was that one? Making change. So transformation. Grace. Gratitude. And so Can you start to see the words again?
I can. Faith. Yep. got it.
Right. So it's sometimes really helpful to keep these value stones with you. My clients will pull them out, and I'm like, when you're feeling lost and you just feel as if you're empty, just really tap into things that give you meaning and purpose. And for the final vision, I want you to thank yourself after you leave here. You don't have to say it out loud, but just internally for taking the time to be curious about the science of your happiness. And I want you to plan joy in the future. So spread this information with someone who needs to hear it. Share with them that joy. Because like I said, joy is contagious. I truly believe that joy has the power and the capacity to change individuals, families, communities, and the world, right? When we have joyful leaders, they usually don't make terrible decisions for everyone, right?
No.
So joy really is powerful. It is worth it to invest in your joy. Joy is your birthright as a human being.
I love that. Oh, that was so good. Amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I believe we have time now for some questions. We're going to have a microphone go around so we can hear you all loud and clear. And let's get maybe 3 to 4, I think we have time for. Yeah, any questions for Dr. Judith? I think we've got a microphone that's going to be coming around. Here we go. We've got a question right up here in the front. Blue wristband. I know, it's hot up here. I'm going to bask in my Dr. Joy for as long as I can. Love it.
Give me 2 minutes.
Hello. How are you?
He said give him 2 minutes.
Okay.
Is it on?
Oh, it is
Oh.
on. Yeah.
I don't know why he said give him 2 minutes.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I'll grab it for you.
I was interested when you talk about your lab, if you do anything scientific in there. I have a question about depression in relation to hormonal changes that women may go through in puberty, high school age, and even later. My depression is different than it was when I was younger. But hello? Yeah. The world changed, like you said. And I think the times I was most depressed was when email and 24/7 working came about. But I just wanted to ask you that about the lab and the hormones.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it also is important to highlight the mind-body connection and that biopsychosocial. The biological components that take place in the brain of a woman, it's different than in a man. We're learning that now. And many of the clinical studies did not include women until the early 1990s. So there's this huge knowledge gap. It's wild, right? That this is even that this happened in such a wealthy country, but it's unfortunate, and it's something that we're trying to catch up with. But one of our earlier studies had to do with postpartum depression, because we know that when in the 3rd trimester and after, progesterone, which is a hormone that's throughout the body, drops in women during that time. And that can lead to changes in the way that they feel. So changes in terms of sadness, anxiety. That's why a lot of mothers, they'll be checking in on their kid and they're like, is the child breathing? It's this almost like excessive worry. And it can be really confusing because, we're given this message from society that we're supposed to be happy when we have a child. But 80% of women go through something called the blues. 80%. So we're sending this picture, this Hallmark picture of like happy mom and baby, but 80% of us feel like crap. And then another, a smaller percentage, like some of the data says 10 to 20% actually have postpartum depression, which is clinical depression where the sadness impacts your functioning. So that can get in the way of you bonding with your child or just enjoying this moment, right? So some of the earlier studies that we did in our lab focused on medication called brexanolone, which kind of mimics the hormone that drops in the brain, so that the moms get back to their baseline quicker. It works really quickly. We did, and it was the first ever postpartum depression study ever FDA approved, which is like kind of like in my life, like in all lifetime. So that's just how behind we are. Right now we're looking at psilocybin for postpartum depression, but there's so much research that needs to be done. And then Harvard is actually using that same medication that we use for the postpartum moms. They're actually studying it in perimenopause and menopause, because the thought is that the hormonal fluctuations are what's causing some of the mood changes. And so that's very validating, because a lot of people blame themselves. They're like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not this way? Well, when we show them what happens in the brain, they're like, oh, so it's not my fault. It's science. And you'll see vulnerable periods throughout a woman's life. Like when she first gets her period, there's something called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, where some people have really intense mood swings. So we'll see premenstrual dysphoric disorder, postpartum depression, and then perimenopause and menopause as being the vulnerable points in life. So we do need more science in those areas. Women are largely underserved. And I'm actually on the board for Let's Talk Menopause, which is a national nonprofit that advocates for more research funding in this area, because it is really underserved.
Fascinating. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Hey, Dr. Joseph.
Hello, how are you?
Good. So my question, sort of observation, you mentioned mothers' relationships to their children, and how depression and anxiety play a role. And I'll tell you a little bit about me. I have 3 children. My first child, when I had my first child, I had uncontrolled anxiety and depression. And I had this throughout my pregnancy. And what I noticed with my oldest son is that he has very high anxiety. And I'm concerned about him. So fast forward, I have 2 other children. In that time, I realized I had it, and I got treated for it. And my other 2 children do not exhibit those symptoms. They don't have, they are freer. They don't have anxious ideations, like nothing like that. But I noticed that with my first child, and sometimes I feel a little guilty about that, but I challenged that thinking and realizing that I didn't know then what I knew after I had my other 2 children. And so if there's a correlation that way, so say I passed it down, or maybe he's mirroring me, or he mirrored me in a very vulnerable time for his development, how then can I help him? Can I help him? Is that something that, I just passed it down and he has to kind of work through that? Like, how would I then work through that, or help him work through that?
Well, thank you for your vulnerability. I'm not your doctor. I can't really treat you, but what I will tell you is that in my practice, a lot of the mothers who had a lot of anxiety early on, they noticed similar things, because children mirror you, right? When you look at the videos of babies being born, and you have the dad and the mom looking at the baby and sticking their tongue out, the baby will stick their tongue out. They're just made to mirror us. And so the great thing about children is that they're so resilient, and there's something called neuroplasticity, where your brain is constantly changing. It used to be thought that your brain is fully developed by 25, but we know now that the brain has the capacity to continue changing. So the good news is that your son can always pick up skills. You can always find support for him. And, by you naming emotions and mirroring that, sometimes people feel anxious, and that's okay, and this is what we're going to do to soothe. You're providing that model for positive coping, adaptive coping. But that guilt and that shame is something I see a lot with women. Like, they'll be like, oh, I wish I had done this, I wish I had done that. And again, I say, you can't control what happens in your brain. This is just a part of being a mother. What you can do is start to plan, for a different future. Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
Good evening. Thank you
Hello.
for having this. I can't wait to read the book. I want to ask a question about you talked about generational trauma and stuff that's passed down. And I am like a high functioning, I think, after I saw that you were going to be here, I'm like, oh my God. My mother is not here anymore. And so I found out something after she passed that was very alarming. And it gave me the reason why my brothers and our childhood was the way it was. And so everybody around us knew what happened. And I'm trying to figure out, when you have this generational trauma and you can't go back to confront the people, not my mother, the people who knew, and some of them have gone on, how do you deal with that? Because I think not knowing what was going on with her when she was living, being very depressed, I think she did carry me in a way that this woman just spoke of. I believe that my mother carried me in a way that made me very high functioning, overachieving, and then still never being happy with the achievements that I have done and accomplished in life. So how do you deal with that generational trauma when you can't really confront or deal with the people who kept these secrets?
Yeah, I actually talk about that in the book a great deal. There are some exercises in there that I talk about in relation to patients that I've worked with in the past and carefully disguise them to protect them. But one of the tools that I put in there was writing these letters to people who have passed. And, excuse me, there's actually an organization that allows people to write letters to those who have passed on, and they collect the letters so that the letters don't end up being bounced back, so that you have that sort of closure. Because there are so many things that you want to resolve, but you can't. And there's also a term in the book that I put as the wash method, when you want to confront people, but you're like, should I confront them or is it a wash, right? So the W is the why. Why is it that you want to confront them? Is it because you need to for legal issues? Is there some type of like deed to resolve, or, you know, what is it that you're doing? Is it just to get closure? Because sometimes with my clients, I'm like, you may confront them, but you may never feel that sense of closure. So let's really understand the why, right? Like, why did this happen to begin with? You know, if it's a case of someone who's very, let's say, you know, toxic, and it's because they're just like a toxic individual, then maybe it's not even worth it to go that way. And the A is like the agenda. You know, what are you hoping to get out of it? You know, are you hoping to get that sense of peace? Are you hoping to maybe resolve something that's financial? You know, have a clear agenda. And then the S is the strategy. How are you going to go about doing this? Are you going to do it in person? Because some people are violent. You can't go to them. They'll literally try to knock you out. So are you going to do this using a legal strategist, a therapist, an intermediary? Are you going to do this as an intervention? And then the H, I think, is the most important part. How are you going to heal? Because many times we go into these situations seeking closure, or we have to do it for some legal reason or whatever, and then we don't even realize that it has drained us so emotionally that, you know, we sometimes need to take time off to recover. So what is that healing going to look like for you? Are you going to work with a therapist? Are you going to take time off from work? So the wash method really helps you in whether or not you want to confront the person. But the letters give you that sense of peace, because you can say things to this person that you always wanted to say, you know, and that's maybe the closest that you get to closure. But thank you for being vulnerable with that question.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for all the wisdom, information, knowledge, and so much amazing takeaways, Dr. Judith Joseph. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. It was wonderful to hear your questions.